Good morning. Here we are with Dr. Jason Rodker, and we're going to talk about bullying in the age of technology. Thank you, Jason, for coming.
Thanks for having me. Thank you guys for coming. This is the usual. This is the Breakfast Club here.
Yes.
nice to see you guys. And I'd like to encourage people online they can chime in with questions and comments, right?
Of course.
We have
do
here
that,
the tech.
So I'd like to encourage people online to be part of the conversation. That would be great. So just a little background about myself. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work primarily with kids and teenagers. There's a lot of family work that goes along with that also. So I end up working with adults and parents as well. I've worked in a lot of different settings with kids. I've worked in public education settings, elementary schools, middle schools, alternative high schools also, so kids with more acting out behaviors and emotional kinds of dysregulation and behavioral issues. I've worked also in partial hospital settings with kids and residential settings as well. So my experiences with kids of all ages. One of my early training experiences was in East Orange in a community mental health center for basically infants through 7 years old, so very young.
Wow.
Very focused on very early childhood and parents, and helping parents to establish positive attachments with their very young children. So that's kind of where that work really does inform most of what I talk about here, no matter what the topic is. When I come, it's always usually grounded in kind of an appreciation for early childhood development. So that will be weaved into the talk today also. All right, so it's a kind of a heavy topic today, bullying. There's a lot of questions that come up around this topic, bullying and also technology. Kind of a natural spin-off topic related to bullying these days is the issue of suicide also. Today we talk about suicide being linked to bullying, I think a lot more than we did in the past. So while the talk today won't be focusing on suicide, that may come up during the course of our conversation, and there may be questions that you guys have about that. But really the talk today will focus on bullying mostly. I'll bring technology into the conversation towards the end a little bit. And I really would like also to get across the idea that I don't see myself here, I don't see my role as being just the purveyor of information and kind of teaching do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, all those kind of things. I really see myself mostly as being a facilitator of an important conversation. That's the approach I try to take to all of these talks. And I think it's so important that we have these conversations, and especially around a topic like bullying, which brings up a lot of personal feelings for people, and is a very difficult area for parents, helping their children negotiate kind of social relationships and social situations. I think it's very important that we don't only focus on fixing the kids, so children are involved in bullying. What do we do with those kids to get them to not, be in that situation anymore? But that we really look at ourselves. This is not just a kid issue. This is an us issue. In our society today, I think there's a reason why we're seeing a rise in bullying and violence and aggression, amongst kids. I don't think kids are born bullies. I don't think kids are born victims. I think there's something about the way that our society is structured and the kinds of experiences that we as adults are creating that are contributing to this. So really the focus needs to be on us as much as it is on the kids. So feel free to chime in with questions, comments as we go. I don't mind being interrupted. I actually prefer it. So gives me a break from talking, and it gives people a break from hearing me talk. So feel free to chime in.
Are we also going to discuss about these various online games that these kids do, and out of peer pressure, there was some game which was going on last year, I believe, where the last step of that game was you commit suicide on camera, and then yeah, so there were like multiple steps of a online game that the kids were playing, the high schoolers, and then it was like the last step is you commit suicide. that's it. And then, yeah.
Well, my question to that is, how do they allow people to make those games? You know?
Mm.
Exactly.
How are they approved? Somebody has to approve them.
And
or
then
maybe
there's so
there's
much
no
of peer
approval
pressure
required.
because
bullying used to be maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's just a new version of it
yeah.
because it's something that's available now. It's insane. It's insane, though. I think it takes it to a whole other level that we've never
Two weeks ago, I
experienced
was
before.
reading an article on New York Post, and middle schoolers in Florida, 2 boys killed a third boy, a classmate. It was on New York Post, and I was like just taken aback. Middle schooler, which is like 10 or 11-year-olds. How did they land up doing it?
Well, there are
And
kids
why?
intending suicide when they're 8, right? And 9, very early.
And why?
Yeah, let's come back to those kind of questions when we talk about technology towards the end a little bit. But I think your question does kind of, again, shine the light on the fact that it's the adults kind of creating some of this culture, right? It's the kids didn't create the technology. The kids didn't create the games. Adults made these decisions to kind of create the technology and then have it be available to kids, you know. So yeah, we'll come back to that. So I was wondering if people might be willing to start off the conversation, maybe sharing any personal experiences when you were younger, either seeing another child be bullied or being involved with bullying yourself, either as the bully or as the person being bullied. And what those experiences, what you remember of those experiences. Does anyone care to? Anyone brave enough to share?
I used to get teased a little bit for looking Asian.
Mm.
Yeah, in like middle school, or
Mhm.
rather elementary school. Yeah, that's something that still kind of hurts, but yeah, it didn't feel good. I didn't really share it with anybody. I just kind of kept it to myself.
Mm.
So, because I didn't know who to go to. Yeah.
Yeah, so even as adults, like we still can, we still feel the pain really. Of
Yeah.
it. It doesn't necessarily go away. You know, obviously we become capable of coping with it.
Right.
You know, but we remember it. You know, and speaking for myself, you know, when I was in 8th grade, that was a tough time for me. I was had a falling out with my friend group, and felt whether being victimized or feeling bullied. I think it's important to look at both sides. You know, there's the perception that the
Yeah.
victim has of the way they're being treated versus the reality of the way they're being treated, which I think sometimes factors in, you know. And so for me, what I can say is, at the time, I perceived myself to be a victim of the situation, and I felt very much bullied. And it was a horrible kind of feeling of being kind of ostracized and pushed out of the group, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of shame, you know, in those kind of experiences that we still kind of feel as adults. We can still kind of relate to that shame. And shame is something that I'll be talking a lot about, actually. So, you know, thank you for reminding us that
Yeah.
these feelings don't go away necessarily,
Mhm.
you know. And the way that we as adults then handle that shame, I think, has a lot to do with the kind of structures we create for our children and the way we help them through these situations. So if we have not come to terms with our own shame and past pain, you know, in similar situations, we're not going to be able to help our children in the best way that we can. So do you remember how the adults kind of, or did you seek help, or do you
I
remember how the
didn't.
adults, you didn't?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I just was too afraid, I
Mm.
guess. Yeah.
And nobody noticed the teachers
No.
did.
No.
So how many kids in the classroom?
I don't even
at school?
remember.
Mm.
But it just was like uncomfortable,
Mm.
you know, together.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So a couple little stats just to kind of set the stage. About, you know, I was in preparation for this talk, I was doing some reading, and you know, there are lots of different studies on this topic, and some of them contradict each other, and you know, so, but anyway, according to some studies, suicide is the third leading cause of death for teens, and half of those suicides have been linked to bullying. At least this was what one study found, was that about half the teenage suicides were related in some way to bullying. A reaction to the bullying. Another study found that 70% of people were in some way bullied during childhood, had some childhood experience of feeling bullied, about 70%. So that's most of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can you describe exactly what you call bullying?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
perfect. Leads me right into the next.
Because teasing is a little like well.
Right.
I would like
Right.
to hear your description of it.
Yeah. Well, the description that I'll give you is based on the first description I'll give you is a definition of bullying put out there by a guy named Olweus. He that's the last name. I think his first name is Dan Olweus. He is pretty much like the current foremost authority on bullying. Like, he's dedicated his whole career to researching and writing about bullying and developing intervention programs for bullying. And his definition of bullying includes 3 specific parts. So if the interaction does not include these 3 parts, then it technically is not bullying, but maybe something else. So the 3 parts that he identifies are that there's aggression involved, which that part seems pretty obvious, that it's repetitive, that it goes on for a while.
Verbal or physical?
Could be verbal, could be either. Could be either, it could be physical or verbal, but aggressive, aggressive, continuing, over a period of time, and that there's a differential of power. There's a power differential between the quote-unquote victim and the bully. So if you take those 3 parts and you start to apply it to different situations, you can start to kind of tease out, well, maybe this isn't bullying, maybe this is something else. So if it's a one-time episode, at least Olweus and some of the researchers in the field would not consider that one-time episode to qualify as bullying. If it was between 2 equals, 2 peers who were of equal size, equal social standing, equal ability to defend themselves, sometimes kids get in fights. So kids getting in a fight does not qualify as bullying. If it was a situation where there was a much larger child or a child that was in some other way more powerful because of social standing or some other way.
Popular?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, exactly.
What they call popular.
Yeah, exactly. More popular, had more social backing, If it was, a child like that with a child who was, smaller, less ability to defend themselves, maybe less social support.
Low profile.
Low profile. Yeah, exactly. Then that would begin to look more like bullying. I do think the word bullying today, even though it's a real issue, I do think the word bullying gets thrown around kind of haphazardly. At least I notice a lot of adults kind of use that word to describe many different kinds of situations and behaviors, which to me and to a lot of the researchers wouldn't necessarily qualify as bullying. I think it's important that we not overuse the word. It needs to mean something. We can't just become so watered down that it doesn't mean anything.
Could you give us an example of what researchers like you or people like you qualify as not bullying, just to be more clear?
Sure. So, two 13-year-old boys on the bus coming home from school, back and forth, teasing each other about their appearance. Whatever that might be. Oh, what a stupid haircut you have. Oh, well, look at what you're wearing. Back and forth, but in equal amounts, of back and forth, and neither one feels the victim of the other. There's, in some ways, kids do kind of work out kind of competitive kind of feelings with each other in that way. It's like who can top the other, and it's kind of like that's more a natural kind of normal part of development. Maybe not always expressed in the healthiest way, but it's at least kind of a normal expression of competitiveness.
So
with their
would
peers.
that be teasing then?
You could call it different things, I guess. I think some teasing would qualify as bullying.
Yeah, so if you get into the extreme or the habit of doing it, like,
Right.
on a regular basis, then, right?
Exactly. But again, it could be happening on a regular basis, between two kids who kind of have an unspoken agreement amongst themselves that this is kind of our relationship. This is what we do. We try to top each other. Today I'm on top, tomorrow you're on top. It would really, I think, part of what's missing from this definition is the child's experience of it.
Oh.
You know, so sometimes, as I've seen this happen in school, sometimes we as adults, we put on the child, we project onto the child our conception that they must feel bullied in this situation. You know, they must feel horrible. That might not be their experience. So now that I'm thinking about it, and these conversations are always helpful for me because my thoughts always evolve over the course of these conversations. I may even by the end disagree with some of the things that I've said early on. That can happen.
Socrates meant, and I think it's so important what you say because it's actually great. That's basically how we do the classes here.
Okay, good.
But
Good.
Socrates, just so you know, called that masholika. So in
Okay.
English, I don't know how to say mayolik, maybe it's called.
Okay.
So it's called masholika, the learning process of dialoguing.
Right,
And
right.
talking about dialoguing, I think when what the kids are missing sometimes, you know, the teenagers is vocabulary or knowing how to dialogue with somebody else. So maybe what you're saying, the teasing about or talking about, you know, the clothes they wear or something like that, it's a way of establishing a communication, right?
Yeah.
With the other person, they just don't know how to do it in a different way.
Right, right.
So that would not be bullying then.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Now, thinking back to myself when I was in middle school, which is really, I think, the time when this all peaks, you know, all this competitiveness and all this, you know, one-upping each other and who's on top and who's not, you know, that really peaks in middle school. And for me, for whatever reason, I had trouble kind of getting that, you know. So again, this is, I think, an important part of the discussion whenever we're talking about bullying is it really depends on the kids involved.
Oh, she's here.
She's on her way. Yeah. She always makes it here. You know. So what to me seemed like bullying to another kid in my situation, they might have responded to it much differently. They might have kind of understood kind of the social aspect of some of the teasing.
Maybe they
that
like the
went on.
attention.
Or,
right?
yeah, or maybe even that.
They're getting the attention.
So it really does depend on the kids involved.
Are you?
I think.
I just wondering, are you familiar with the New Jersey's legislative definition of bullying, and if so, can you compare it to the definition you just gave?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
I'll come back to that. It's in here somewhere.
So everything is in place.
Yeah, it's in here somewhere.
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to is the HIB laws, the harassment, intimidation, and bullying laws. I have a perspective on that because when I worked in the school, I was kind of involved in some of those cases, you know, and dealing with some of the HIB cases that came up. So, yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. But before we do, I'd like to kind of talk about a different definition of bullying. Now, the first one that I gave was kind of more descriptive of the surface level characteristics of situations, right? Kind of what goes on, what you can see with your eyes happening in the situation. But there's another level to it too, and an author that I was reading in preparation for today, Jonathan Fast, is another researcher in the field, in this field. And he really describes bullying as, I love the term he used, weaponized shame. So this comes back to what I alluded to earlier about shame really being involved in bullying on both sides, whether you're the victim or the bully. It being there's shame involved there. And I like his description, weaponized shame, because that really shines a light on what it's all about. You know, what's actually happening underneath the surface level of the behaviors. And I think it's really important that when we try to help kids in these kind of situations, that we don't just try to combat the behavior. You know, I think an attitude, which we'll get more into a little bit later on, but one of the attitudes we've taken in trying to help in these situations is punitive. Punish the bully. As long as people know there are consequences for this, they'll stop doing it. That's not really seeming to work from my perspective, what I'm observing with my own eyes, you know. So we really need to not just try to combat the behavior, but really understand what's underlying the behavior and really try to help kids cope with the feelings that are underneath, you know, their actions.
For the bully or the victim, both?
For both. I think for both. Yeah.
So the bully finds pleasure in doing it, you think?
Well, sometimes. You know, I think that kids bully in different ways and for different reasons, and have different motivations for it, and get different things out of it. But one way of looking at it is that it's always an attempt to cope with an underlying shame of some kind, and I'll talk more about this. Again, this is one perspective, but I think it's one that's pretty relevant, and I think kind of on base. So shame is related to, one way of looking at shame is that it's related to whether or not we are feeling a sense of belonging, whether or not we're feeling connected to a social group, or whether or not we feel a sense of importance in our relationship with other people, right? The sense of belonging. We tend, as people, to feel shame when we do something or behave in a way, or there's something about us that disconnects us from the social group, when in some way we've been told by the social group, you are not acceptable, right? That's really the root of shame, right? And I will, a little bit later on, get into some of the roots of those kind of experiences early on in development. But really, shame is about not belonging. So if we keep that in mind, then a bully's attempt to manage their shame is they're really acting out of a sense of being disconnected, being in some way rejected, in some way not good enough, right? And one of the ways we can go about coping with those feelings is to become aggressive and act those feelings out. Two kind of primary ways of dealing with shame are either to turn it, in the way that Dr. Fast described it, was to turn against ourselves, turn that shame against ourselves, or against others. So you can imagine turning it against others would create a bully. Turning it against the self would create more the victim kind of mentality. So I think it's important to keep in mind in bullying situations, it really does require two participants. It's not just the bully's fault necessarily. I think if we look at it that way, and I know it's kind of a radical way of thinking about it, because it is partly the bully's fault. But if we look at it as just the bully's fault, then we're really missing what it is that we've done to create a victim also. There's a shame experience there for the victim as well, that something about their experience has created for them. So it takes two. It takes the shamed person who acts out, whose tendency is to act out the shame towards someone else, and it also takes a shamed person whose tendency is to withdraw and to take it out on the self.
So I still remember we used to have a psychologist, he's retired now and in California, but to come and talk about different topics, right, like you are doing now. And I remember him telling a story. He worked mostly with teenagers, so there was a lot with the bullying and all that. And so I remember him saying that he had this teen for a long time, and always with different stories about somebody that would come and tell him, you are short, that he was short. He actually was a short boy, and how maybe he didn't feel good about it, and then he had somebody coming to tease him about it, or to bully him actually about it, often, until this psychologist one time tells him, okay, now this is what you're gonna do. When he comes, you're gonna stand up and you're gonna say this. And he actually gave him the words and the power of saying that, and that was the end of the story. So I don't know if I just remember that because he finally had to tell him, okay, this is how you're gonna do. When he comes, you're gonna say this. And he said, as a psychologist, I should probably have not said that, but I was waiting for that reaction for the victim to stand up for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then he needed the words. It's like when
Yeah.
a little kid needs to learn how to share, and then you tell him words to say, right?
Right.
Basically something like that. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you were going there, but I remember there was a funny story the way he told it, but it was very at one point, then you have to teach the victim to, right?
Right.
What to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to get back to that a little bit more. Or I don't know if we were ever really there, but I think we've gotten really far away from that, from really addressing the victim's needs. We've gotten so much in the mentality of punishing the bully that I feel like the victim actually gets lost in the mix a little bit, and we're not helping them to learn skills so that they don't become a victim the next time.
That's right.
I
think that sharing, the comment about the sharing really sparked something with me, because I feel like in some ways maybe it starts with that. Like, I'm thinking about the situations that I was in maybe when Leah was younger, and she would be playing with a toy, and another child might come along and just take away the toy. You know, and as a parent, you're like, oh, well, I want to teach my child to be nice, but at the same time, you don't want to teach your child to just, well, they took it away.
Yeah, not do anything about it.
But I always struggled with, you know, and Leah would look to me like, what do I do? Because actually she had this issue with her cousin, and so, like, as a parent, I don't feel comfortable disciplining somebody else's child. And I feel like there were some instances where I said to Leah, just let her take it, you know, but that wasn't the right, because then I just created a victim. Instead of teaching her to stand up for herself and say, you know, no, I was playing with that first. When I'm done with it, then I will give it to you.
Or sometimes you cannot stop the situation, but at least in that case, the child can say, I don't like what you did, for example, and just leave the statement, and, you know, you're not, because that way she has to go and grab the toy again, right? So you don't want her to start chasing the child that took the toy away, but at least to say, I don't like what you did.
Right.
We have to give the kids the words sometimes here to help them out, because it's hard, it's confusing, you know, to identify the emotions, right? It's really a challenge for us as adults, and for kids, you know, they're learning all about that. So we have to be there, right? Present.
I accept you have a challenge. I have a challenge as an adult
It is,
sometimes
it is.
saying something
It is
the
very
correct
different.
way.
Oh yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
imagine if we can't do it, how are they supposed to do
It's
I think most of us feel that confrontation is one of the most uncomfortable kind of experiences, right? Most of us try to avoid confrontation.
And it doesn't have to be a confrontation.
It doesn't have
like
to
you
be,
said,
right.
you can just state how you feel and just keep
Right.
moving on, or agree to disagree, whatever. But you know.
You could probably take that right into politics too, right? But it's true. Like, I don't want to go on that tangent, but it's just, I've been thinking about that lately, and I mean, you could stream that right into politics.
Yep. I'm going to come to that, actually. I'm going to tie that in a little bit. Politics.
Oh, good.
We'll get there.
it's all related.
So some protective factors are, like we're talking about, actually the ability to verbally process shameful experiences. Shame is one of the most difficult feelings to talk about, because it's shame. I mean, it's very uncomfortable. But kids who experience shaming kind of situations can be helped to kind of verbally process that, to talk about it. That's a protective factor, talking about it, you know, so that they don't end up turning it towards themselves or towards someone else, but they have the ability to kind of discuss it within a relationship with someone. Having other affiliations and social supports. So let's say a kid is kind of pushed out of one particular group they belong to. And when I say group, it really could be anything. It could be an actual group, or it could be a mentally constructed group. A child might think of themselves as being, they could be, part of the basketball team. They might be on the basketball team. Or they might think of themselves as one of the artistic kids. Or they might create some other category or group that gives them a sense of belonging. And a threat to their belonging to that particular group that they've chosen to identify with could create feelings of shame. So it helps for them to have other groups to belong to also, to not have all their eggs in one basket, but to have other social supports as well. And this really could also just be parents. Like, that's a form of social support also. So we as parents, if we're providing our kids with the opportunity to really talk about these experiences without projecting a lot of our own feelings into the situation, which can be hard sometimes, without rushing to tell them what to do all the time, although they may need that. They may need to be coached. But first, to just be listened to.
Yes, and
yeah,
listen
to wait.
and see what happens.
First to be listened to. Really, that's the first thing that they need. And if they have that, that will help. You know, that will help. In one of my past talks, have I ever brought up Star Wars? Do you guys remember me going on a little rant about Star Wars?
No.
Okay, good. It's good. So I like to talk about it. So I'll talk about it now just for a moment. Has everybody here seen Star Wars? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Okay, good. All right. So there's a character in Star Wars which I think really is a extremely powerful symbol of this shame dynamic, this shame as it relates to bullying kind of dynamic. and also the role that anger plays in dealing with shame. You know, often there's a lot of anger. You know, bullies are acting out of anger. You know, but underneath that anger is the shame. Yeah. So one thing we notice more often with kids is when they act out of anger, when they appear angry. That's something we tend to notice right away. What we're not always so conscious of is the fact that anger is often covering up something more fragile, a more vulnerable feeling even, like shame. You know, anger is often comes very quickly in to rescue us, to save us, to protect us, to make us feel powerful, you know, when we're feeling shamed. So Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, he was a little boy. He was the little boy in Star Wars that grew up to be Darth Vader, right? And I think he exemplifies that pattern of shame feeding anger, feeding shame, feeding anger. You know, when he was beginning his train. This is getting really geeky now. I'm getting into the details of this, but so he was someone that during his the beginning stages of his training to become a Jedi, he was training to become a Jedi. He witnessed his well, he didn't witness, but he got there just too late to save his mother. His mother was murdered, and he got there just too late to save her. A little bit later on in his journey, he lost his wife, and he began to feel very, I think, ashamed of not being able to do more to save these people, you know, that he loved. He started to become angry. He started, you know, and he wished that there was more he could do. He allowed that shame to kind of fuel his anger to the point where he ended up being seduced by the dark side and becoming Darth Vader, really the ultimate bully, you know. I just think that's a good example of how shame, if we're not careful, can kind of lead to anger, and if we really feed into that anger, can lead us in the wrong direction. So I think that story of Anakin Skywalker is just a good example of the way a bully, you know, how a bully can be created, you know. So anyway, I'll move on from that now.
So shame then basically comes from not feeling the belonging.
It can come from not feeling belonging. I think it can also come from not feeling good enough. You know, like we said earlier, just in some way not feeling good enough. And I think that was Anakin Skywalker's, one of his primary experiences was he was not good enough. He was not strong enough to have saved his mother, to have saved his wife. He just was not good enough in those ways.
And the good enough comes from the parenting part or from the peers?
I'm going there right now. I'm going there right now. There's a distinction that can be made between what FAST refers to as proximal versus distal shame. So proximal experiences of shame are the ones that are a little bit more immediate, kind of closer to our experience. So if I walk out of here today and someone, you know, heckles me or calls me a name or something like that, that's a proximal shaming experience, right? It's happening right now. And so there are those which may happen from peer to peer, you know. But sometimes I think what determines whether or not a particular person is going to respond negatively to that proximal shaming experience is whether there are other distal experiences of shame that they've experienced. And these would be earlier in life, you know, kind of early on in life. If there's been a lot of shame built up early in life for not being good enough in some kind of way, then we already have kind of a store of shame built up in us. So these proximal kind of situations will trigger that shame to a greater degree. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to talk really early on now. I mean, Erik Erikson talked about shame in his stages of child development. His second stage of child development was he called autonomy versus shame. And so the idea is, you know, during the, you know, after the first or second year of life, children enter this stage where it's very important to them to feel a sense of autonomy. You know, they're becoming a little bit more competent. They're more physically competent. They're beginning to use language more. They're wanting to feel a certain sense of autonomy. And if that need for autonomy is stifled to too great of a degree, they can develop some feelings of shame. So, for instance, using the word no a lot with kids during that stage of development can sometimes make kids feel like everything, let's say every time a child tries to make a choice about what activity to engage in, or attempts to do something new, or expresses an intention of some kind, if they're constantly told no, 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 and that need that they have is kind of repressed, they can start to feel like, well, these urges that I'm having are not okay. It's not okay that I want to go climb that ladder, or it's not okay that I want to try to make bread even though I'm making a complete mess of the, you know what I mean? So if they're constantly, does that make sense? Do I need to say more, or does that make sense?
I
Yeah.
got that.
So that's for the bully part, right? They're not good enough, and the victim.
Well, I think it could factor into both. I think it could go either way. Because there's something to be said also for kind of inborn temperament. A certain person might have a temperament to be more aggressive, to be more assertive. That person may end up becoming more of a bully. Other people are born with a more cautious, more reserved temperament. That person may be more likely to become a victim. I'm painting this in broad strokes right now, obviously, but there may be those inborn tendencies also. So an experience would trigger a very different reaction in two different people.
So is there a connection between trauma and shame?
That's a big question. It's a good question. It's one that I didn't think much about in preparing for today. Trauma and shame. I mean, yeah, shame is a primary experience in trauma, especially depending on the kind of trauma. If it's the kind of trauma where it was kind of an unforeseen, kind of uncontrollable freak kind of event that happened, if it's that kind of trauma, like a discrete kind of one episode kind of trauma, maybe not so much. But if it's the more common kind of trauma, which is what some people refer to as complex trauma, which is kind of the building up of small little, usually relational based experiences during the course of development, then yes, that kind of trauma is definitely related to shame, I think. And that's the kind of trauma that I think goes overlooked a lot. Often when we think of trauma, we think of someone had a major accident happened, or there was an earthquake, or something like that, right? But the much more common form of trauma is this complex trauma, these little kind of insults to the person's sense of self, over time, usually starting fairly early in life. And that's definitely comes along with a lot of shame. Yeah. I'm glad you asked the question, because it's that kind of relational trauma which I think leads to a lot of this these bullying victim relationships that I think we see, with our kids. Yeah. Did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, just what you're saying about the shame and the kids who are bullied, and I just or the kids who become bullies. I was just thinking of they talk about the and I forget the term for the kids who are most at risk because they have these risk factors when they're young, and poverty and abuse and I think they have and when they talk about childhood trauma, they have like a broader, as opposed to just like like you're saying, like death of a family member. It's also other things like poverty and neighborhood violence and.
I have to say wealth too, because I've seen a lot into. I don't want to say the names, but around here, lots of bullying too.
Maybe that came from childhood neglect or like that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So, but like those are like those ongoing things that you were talking about that aren't necessarily considered. Like most people wouldn't consider those violence, but certainly in a childhood's development, that would be, I think, something that would be traumatic.
Yeah, I think you're referring to ACEs. That's adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, and I forget the whole list of them, but there are some. They involve poverty. They involve broken relationships. They involve witnessing violence, being the victim of violence, those kinds of things. And the more of those ACEs a person has, the more likely they are to exhibit traumatic-like reactions when they're older. PTSD type reactions. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and so I was work now on PTSD in children. That I've read a little bit about that they're now starting to realize that children are subject to PTSD like symptoms when they
in
get
schooling
into
actually.
in
I mean, just even with the school system.
Yeah.
We've talked about that in one of the workshops.
So what are PTSD symptoms, like aggression or?
emotional
opposite.
dysregulation and aggression.
I just want to also make clear, just on a side note, when I say things like children hearing no too often, I just want to make it clear. I do think it is very important to set limits for kids. I don't think it's healthy. I want Lara to know
talk about that.
I want Lara to hear me saying this also.
Worship.
Exactly. It's very important for kids to have boundaries and for there to be limits and structure. And of course, there are times that we have to stop a child from doing something. We have to say no. But the way that we do it, I think, needs to be in a way that it's not shaming to the child, and that it's not sending the child the message that your intention or your desire or your drive that you're exhibiting right now is bad. It has to be simply right. So for now, I'll just say that.
Right?
And
Kind
firm.
and firm.
Yeah, kind and
At
firm.
the same
Exactly.
And we'll go back to that during our workshops of positive discipline.
Right.
When we have all the dates there, we can announce them later.
Right. So along with this, the roots of early shame experiences, these distal experiences of shame, I think it's very important for kids to feel a sense of unconditional love. And early on in life, if there are too many experiences of love being conditional upon certain behaviors being exhibited, the child can experience that as a lack of acceptance and a source of rejection. And I think those distal experiences of shame, if they happen frequently enough over a long enough period of time, set a child up later on to respond to proximal experiences of shame in a much more unhealthy way.
It's funny because Leah, I shouldn't say her name out loud, but she sometimes she just gets into these like angry outbursts, and it's been happening a little bit more frequently, so therefore it's been making me upset, so I get angry, and I know I shouldn't do that, and I'm working on it. But yesterday was a good example of this, where she was doing something that was unsafe, and Jeremy told her no, and then she got angry, and started yelling, and then I got angry and started yelling. But after things cooled down last night, when I put her to bed, I made sure that I said to her, I know Mommy can get angry sometimes, and Mommy shouldn't get angry, but I want you to know that even when Mommy's angry, Mommy still loves you, even though it might not seem like it. And she's like, I love you. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard when emotions are high to remember that, it's there's reason for it, but especially for her, like, I want to make sure that she understands, like, even if Mommy gets angry and Mommy's trying not to be angry, Mommy needs a timeout. I still love you. What?
I said I'll end up yelling at Bharat every day, but I think it's more of a cultural thing. Indian moms are loud. They're like, ah!
I grew up in a loud family. And it's just big family gatherings. I mean, it was like, who can talk the loudest and outsmart the other one. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that example. I mean, I think it's something we can all relate to. Do you mind if I comment a little? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you were explaining to her that you shouldn't get angry. You said to her, right? I wonder if that's a tall order to not get angry. I wonder if even more maybe the message that you really were trying to get across was that, or is that it's okay to be angry, but the way you reacted to your anger is not okay.
I think I told her I shouldn't yell.
Okay, yeah, because there's a big difference
That's
there.
what I said. Because I even
Yeah.
said to her, it's okay that she feels angry,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's the yelling that makes mommy angry. And then
Right.
mommy yells.
right.
And I'm like, and mommy's old. Mommy should know the right thing. Like, I told her, you're only 6.
Well, it's,
you know,
it's
you're
not easy
learning.
also.
Mommy should know better.
Right. That's a really important distinction, though. You know, it might
Yes.
seem small, but it's a very
Yes.
important
Very
distinction
important.
for a child to know that the anger is actually okay.
Mm.
Like, anger is as a natural emotion to have. Adults get angry, kids get angry. The anger is not the problem. The problem is potentially how we express the anger.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. And actually, I did say to her, it's okay to feel angry, but yelling
Right.
and screaming is where mommy needs to work on it.
Yeah, exactly.
You were
Mommy might
telling
need
her
a
also
timeout.
that your love was unconditional.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I got
Right.
pretty upset yesterday. I was pretty angry. So.
Really, this topic that we're on right now, shame, and especially these early shame experiences, ties in nicely with the positive discipline
So we can get
series
back
that
to
we
that.
that we have coming up, because positive discipline really is the antidote to this.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a way to parent children in a way that does not create shame. I think at its core, that's what it's about, right?
I think so.
That's really what it's about. So,
So it's good to
Yeah.
clarify that it's not about saying yes all the time. Like some people
Right.
with a positive discipline title think that we should be saying yes, and it's very permissive
Right.
kind of discipline. That's not what it is. Actually, it's being kind and firm at the same time.
Yeah.
We mentioned. So in that way, trying to not to hurt them, but to guide them at the same
Yes.
time, right?
I was watching this past weekend. I watched the Mr. Rogers documentary that came out
yeah,
recently.
I watched
You guys,
that.
it's called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?"
I'd love to watch it.
And I haven't thought much about Mr. Rogers since I was a little kid. I know I used to watch him, but watching this documentary really reminded me of how beautiful his message to kids was. And he was also
Positive, very positive.
very
right?
positive.
What's
Um,
it called again?
It's called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" is the name of the documentary.
And it's on YouTube or?
I got it. I think I got it on HBO kind of
Okay.
thing or something. But yeah, he really was attempting to provide an antidote to shame. Also, he didn't necessarily say it that way, but the message he was giving kids that you deserve to be unconditionally loved. That really is the message to counteract shame.
Like
you know.
Mary Poppins did too.
And Mary Poppins too. Okay, yeah.
One of
yeah.
my favorite.
Yeah.
No, I mean there's a book of it.
Yeah,
So, you know,
PJ
I'm not
Chambers.
talking about Disney because Disney is something.
Yeah.
I'm just saying her character.
Yeah. It made me want to go out and see if I can get all the Mr. Rogers episodes, start showing Liam. And I don't even let him really watch TV, but I was like, he needs to watch Mr. Rogers.
They're on Amazon Prime.
Are they?
And I tried showing Leah an episode, and it was so. I wanted her to watch it, and because I remember loving it too.
Yeah.
It's slow.
Yeah,
It's slow,
It
and
is.
she was not having it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
it is.
Even as an adult, it was too slow.
It is slow compared to today's media, the kinds
Yeah.
of media kids are exposed to today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I ever watched one episode. I don't think so.
It was good.
I mean, I saw parts of what he did, but not because I watched it. And I have to go and watch it.
Yeah.
You're gonna make me watch
He's
TV
good.
or
He's
something.
good. Yeah, right. And I'll mention if there's time. I come back to the media a little bit too. So, all right. So, the next question I have written down here is what makes a bully. We've been talking about shame. That's involved, but also Olweus identified other characteristics, other risk factors involved in kind of how a person becomes a bully, how a child becomes a bully. He identified 5 kind of risk factors. One is a lack of bonding during infancy. And the first 3 of these I'll talk about in a little more detail. For now, I'll just go through the 5. So a lack of bonding during infancy.
With parents, with caregivers.
Yeah, with primary caregiver, whether that's the mother, father, or could be someone else. But lack of bonding with some caregiver during infancy. Parents failing to inhibit aggression early on. Modeling of aggression as a primary problem-solving approach. An impulsive or aggressive temperament. So this is kind of what I mentioned before. Is some kids are born, kids are born with different temperaments. So it's not that every kid who's born with an impulsive, active, aggressive temperament becomes a bully, but he's claiming that is a risk factor. and also the child being larger and stronger than their peers. It's kind of hard for a little guy to become a bully. It's a lot easier to be a bully if you're the big tough one, right? So
Well, Napoleon
again, a
was
risk
very
factor.
short, actually.
Sorry,
Like he had different
Napoleon,
complex.
right? Yeah.
He had different complex.
Well, he was
Yeah.
he was
He
big.
was-
He was big in terms of wielding an army, though. He was, you know, so he was big in that sense. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I'll talk about the first few of those in a little more detail. So bonding first. So insufficient physical contact and or an insecure attachment, you know, between a very young child and a caregiver can lead to a frustration of this need to be connected and belong. Right, this really gets to the heart of positive discipline also, which realizes that a child either becomes aggressive or acts out in some other way when their sense of belonging is threatened, when they don't feel socially connected, and that our initial connection is with a caregiver, with our parents or someone else who's caring for us, right? So if there's a rupture, if there's a disruption of that very early attachment, then our sense of belonging is threatened from a very early age.
So since you mentioned that, I think that refers, and I'm sorry to interrupt this part, but what you just said, the sense of belonging and connection to the community later on, in this size of schools, public or private, but the size, you know, of the big schools, that sense of connection and belonging is lost.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a mathematical equation. There is going to be bullying and more social conflicts, you know, that are not necessarily positive or that will not build into a more confident child just because the child is exposed to that early, like we were talking about, right? So there's no, I mean, how can they, or we can answer this at the end of the whole workshop, but how can really work on bullying, you know, these huge places where kids go? I mean, we're lucky here, but in general.
Right. Yeah, it's much harder in larger settings, you know.
Because where is it, you know, really nobody knows. The teachers don't know all the kids, or they don't have this connection really, or and there's no social time, right, without races and all that. So
So this lack of secure attachment. First of all, that's a child's attachment pattern with their caregiver, with their primary caregiver, has been shown over time in the research to be the most predictive factor of just about all later childhood problems. It's a child's attachment with their parent more than anything else is a predictor of later dysfunction, behavioral issues, emotional issues. So attachment is really one of the most important issues we can be focusing on, you know, with our children. But anyway, ruptures to the attachment, insufficient physical contact, any of these things which frustrate this need to be connected and need to belong, can lead later on to a lack of empathy, you know, so that a child with an insecure attachment or a disruption, you know, in some way, in their relationship with their caregiver, or, you know, primary caregiver, doesn't allow them really to develop the same sense of empathy that another child who is attached and is in an attuned emotional relationship with an adult tends to develop that kind of empathy. And the child's also with this attachment, with these attachment ruptures, is more likely to exhibit antisocial kind of traits, you know, lack of remorse, all the kinds of things that are stereotypically associated with a bully, you know.
Can you explain or give examples of what it would be a rupture of attachment?
Sure. And again, when I talk about this, I don't want to necessarily say that any parent who does this is creating an insecure attachment, because again, it always depends on an interaction, a relationship between the child's temperament and the parent's temperament, right? So one child, two children may respond differently to the same parent. And those of us with multiple children, I'm not yet one of them, but those of you with multiple children probably see this. Not every kid turns out the same. Even though you're the same person, they bring different things to the table. And so your relationship with them becomes different. And their shapes differently. Right, so...
Having questions there or
no question? Okay. Feel free online to chime in with questions or comments.
Is there another side to this? lack of attachment or over attachment maybe.
Over attachment?
Yeah.
Like
I feel I've done that to Varad. Sometimes I feel that he's literally attached to my hip and he needs to be more independent now that he's 8 and I feel that he's not.
Well, ideally, with attempting not to sound judgmental about people's particular situation, because I don't know that much about your particular situation, but
and cultural too, right? Because it's different.
and
yeah, exactly.
well, that's a great point actually, because most of the research I'm talking about around attachment has been done here in this country, around the dominant culture in this in this country. So when you factor in multicultural issues, and attachment might look different in other cultures, the kind of attachment I'm talking about is the kind of attachment where a child feels secure enough to be engaged and also to go their own way and do their own thing. So the hallmark of the kind of attachment I'm talking about is actually the ability to separate and be okay with that, and then come back and also be able to reconnect. So
so what would be the rupture of attachment?
So a rupture of attachment, for instance, if a mother is, and I don't want to sound like I'm blaming mother, it could be whoever it is, if the caregivers are emotionally unavailable for whatever reason, maybe depressed, and so somewhat withdrawn, not kind of tuned into their own feelings, and so they have trouble tuning into their child's feelings because they're either internally distracted or just under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, two working parents, or a single parent who's working, who just simply can't be there, who simply doesn't have as much time to invest as maybe they would like to have, and even when they are there, dealing with all the stresses of modern life, So there are a lot of things about our modern society today which are kind of tailor-made for disrupting this kind of attachment, So there are so many different reasons why attachment could be disrupted. And also today we don't have the same kind of extended family support that maybe we did in years past, or even in other cultures. Modern American society there's not a whole lot of extended family support the way there are in other cultures and the way that there has been in past generations. And so that extended family support in past times or in other cultures might have compensated for some of the parents' shortcomings.
That's right.
Some of the ways in which
I totally agree with that.
some of the ways in which
I
the
totally
primary
agree with it.
yeah.
So Bharat's getting so much of it. Like if I'm lacking in some department, like my sister, she lives on the West Coast, but we meet her so often, and there have been not a single trip that I've just gone with Bharat. It's as a family. So like he travels with my sister, her husband, it's me. So he's just experiencing different parenting techniques.
It takes a community,
It does.
that sometimes families say they feel this is like the extended family because the family is in different parts, of the country or the world, and I understand in that sense that they feel that you really need a community to raise a child.
But then that's where technology is also important, because my son FaceTimes with my mom back in India every single day. So it's like he's literally meeting her. Somehow, because
contact,
he's
right?
seeing her. So it's not really a physical contact.
He will
but
say, "Grandma said it's okay." He gets lots of information from Grandma. I know. He will use.
so he's FaceTiming in the car on our way here to school. So it's like 30
Grandma
minutes
says
of
it's okay
solid.
not to do homework. Sometimes he will come up with that stuff, which is so funny. But it's really very important what you said. I think and you said something the other day that was so beautiful, that you go farther with how is that?
if you want to, it's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
So nice. Yeah, we should have it at the entrance. Right?
Yeah.
Hang in there.
Yeah, that's it reminds me, this idea of going fast is so
Yeah.
important, to our culture right now. We just have this tendency to think that faster is better. The faster my kid can get to the finish line, the better. But the finish line never really comes. They just keep going and going and going, right? So sometimes slowing down and making sure that you're your
Making
relationships are
connections,
sound,
right?
making connections along the way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making connections.
So we talked a little bit about bonding. The second risk factor there that Oweis talked about was parents' failure to inhibit aggression. So I wanted to talk a little bit about inhibition of aggression, because initially that sounds to me like he's saying a parent's job is to squash aggression, basically, like do not allow your child to exhibit aggression. I don't think that's exactly what he means, and I don't think that's exactly the best approach, actually. I think that children do, by their nature, it's the nature of development. It's kind of, development almost is an aggressive kind of act, in the way that you are, in order for a child to develop, they have to let go of what's currently, they have to let go of limitations, right? They have to let go of what they're currently capable of doing and the limitations of their current situation, so that they can kind of outgrow those limitations and move forward in their development. So there's a bit of aggression which is healthy, in childhood development. I think it's more a matter of helping children to contain that aggression in playful ways. Mm-hmm. So you can act out aggression through creating puppet shows and plays. You can have
to channel.
To
I think
channel.
That's what you mean, right?
To channel
in the past, because if you contain the aggression, then it could get against you too, right?
Right. Yes. Let me clarify. So what I mean by contain is to give the child a safe experience of that aggression. Mm-hmm. That this aggression can be contained, not to contain it, meaning stifle it, but mm-hmm. to this aggression is containable, meaning it's tolerable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's safe. It's safe to express this. So finding ways for children to express their aggression safely. For a young child, stereotypically I'm thinking of, a boy with his father. A certain amount of rough and tumble play I think is a healthy thing. That helps the child to learn boundaries. If someone gets hurt, if someone accidentally crosses the line, well, that's a learning experience for the parent and child, right? Oops, we went a little too far that time. I guess we got to pull back next time. So there's a certain amount of letting that aggression out and being playful with it, in a safe enough context. I think helps a child to really learn, about how to manage their aggression. And there are lots of ways aside from rough and tumble play. Like we said, creating a play, or writing a story. Stories can include conflicts and bad things happening, and can include, if you look at some of the classic fairy tales, there's a lot of aggression in those, sometimes, but fairy tales are a great way.
Many times, actually, because that's the whole idea, that they learn how to deal with that bad part of, life, let's say, in a story, right?
Right, yeah.
And also any art form, I will say, or
Art.
just playing with Play-Doh, right?
Right.
It's like, they have a whole story going on, even when we don't even know. Maybe we don't ask them to speak about it, but they're working with it, with the whole story in their mind. So
Right.
That helps a lot. Painting.
Yeah. I think also when we try to intervene with our kids around their aggressiveness, we have to be careful not to be contradictory or hypocritical. And I think this is something we often fall into, like, easily if we're not careful in thinking about it. It seems obvious that if you see your child, for instance, push another child, you might tell them, "Oh, don't push, don't do that. That's not okay." I hear that much more often from parents. What I don't hear then is what to do instead. Mm-hmm. So we're telling our kids what not to do, but then we're leaving them with this kind of aggressive feeling and nothing to do with it, right? So, okay, so you don't want me to push, so what can I do? Mm-hmm. So I think we need to, if we're going to teach our kids not to hurt other people, we also need to teach them how to be gentle, and so rather than just don't push your brother, be gentle like this. Look, he's littler than you. What you can do is you can come up and you can give him a hug, or so show him what to do, not just what not to do, and I think that also this factors in even to small things that we do. I think, I won't say who it is in case they're watching or at some other point watches this, but a family member of mine a while back was helping their toddler to tame his aggression, right? And so I often heard her comment to him, slow down, or be careful, or watch out, you're gonna crash, or watch out, that's gonna fall over, you're gonna knock all this stuff down. And then I would also see her go in front of him and say, "Ew, caterpillar in the house? Ugh, squash." And so, like, if we're going, so to me, that's a bit of a mixed message, right? If we
so they really look at us, as the first role model.
Exactly.
Right? So we have to be careful.
So if we really want to be teaching gentleness and compassion, I think that compassion has to extend to all living things. We can't just expect them to learn the difference between treating people nicely, but you can do whatever you want to animals or bugs just because they're smaller. Compassion is really about treating with respect things that are smaller and weaker than us. And I think we need to be modeling that all the time,
Yeah, we do here. We get a cup, in the lunchroom. We have some
right.
and a plate, and then
exactly.
open the door.
Exactly.
No, but it is important. The kids are, especially little ones, that they imitate. They learn by imitation. That's the main way of learning for the little ones, and they process everything. So they maybe you think they're not watching it, but they are, and they will imitate everything. So it's just being a role model is the best way. I think.
Right. Yeah. And also another part of the contradiction, I think, often is that while we try to teach our kids these lessons, if we're then allowing them to be exposed to violent cartoons, which are showing the exact opposite message, then that's pretty confusing, I think, for kids also. So many of the kids' cartoons today are all fighting. It's like fighting and shooting and, all this kind of stuff. And to go back to what we said earlier about not using violence and aggression as a way of solving problems, that often is the primary way that some of these cartoon characters display solving problems. The way to solve a problem is to beat your opponent. The way to solve a problem is to kill whoever's in your way.
Is that any different though? Like we were talking about languages, and I was, Joseph thinks I know a lot of languages, but like I said,
because you're saying Russian.
Because I say, because I know a couple phrases here and there, and a lot of that was from Bugs Bunny. So I joke. I know Bugs Bunny. I know Looney Tunes French. So, and I looked up Pepe Le Pew, and so I just was looking back at those cartoons, and it's like they were so violent. Dropping the anvil on Wile E. Coyote or whatever. That was all really violent. Is that any different? That cartoon violence. I mean, it was kind of. I guess it was like so ridiculous.
Yeah,
that it was
like
so unrealistic.
Too, right?
They're taping.
Is there?
I was gonna sit over there, but
is there?
Be right in front of the camera.
Is there a difference between that I grew up on and like the current? And I have no idea what the current cartoons for kids look like because we don't watch them. So.
I mean, the answer I would give you is based just completely on my own opinion about it, which, like I said earlier, my opinion about this particular topic is a little bit undeveloped. Like, I'm not sure exactly whether or not I see a huge difference. I'm not exactly sure. Perhaps, what I do see is a lot of the cartoons that kids who come to me for therapy come to my office, and the kind of cartoons and shows they tell me about and the figures they bring in based on these shows. It's usually human figures of some kind, ninjas or warriors or something, but it's usually human figures engaged in direct hand-to-hand combat with weapons, swords, guns. So I don't know if if a rabbit dropping an anvil on a monkey's head. I know that's not the exact. So who would have dropped the anvil on the Roadrunner? Is that what you're thinking of?
Was it Bugs Bunny just to drop it on?
Yeah. Okay. So let's say.
No, it was like Wile E. Coyote. It was Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner.
So
but
it's
it was more like a game, right? It was more like a game. Like
there was a silliness to it.
It was a silliness to it.
It was playful as opposed to sort of more serious.
More real, like you said, the video
right.
games, that then the last step is to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting into the technology now.
Yeah, we are starting
so
to.
important.
And you know, just to use the Roadrunner as an example, the Roadrunner actually would tease Wile E. Coyote too. So it was a back and forth. It was like kind of a give and take, back and forth kind of playfulness.
Yeah, like Tom and Jerry.
Yeah. In that situation,
I grew up on those.
in that cartoon, I'm not sure you could identify who the bully is really. Even though the Roadrunner is the one getting the anvil dropped, the Roadrunner is also the one doing all the teasing. You know, so maybe there's a difference between that and two ninjas, you know, cutting each other with swords, or you know, two human figures. Maybe it's a little bit. Maybe the cartoons from the past are a little bit removed from reality in a way that current cartoons are not. I don't know. That's just my first
so. No, I think
impression.
you're right, because we were talking about for example, the folk tales, and there's always a bad and a good, and there has to be a bad and a good, and the kids pretty much think on black and white, so that's the way that they can see that something is really bad and something is really good. But it's mythological. It's not that you're telling them a story from the news, which we see all the time anyway, right? But that is different, and I think these video games and the cartoons, which I'm not familiar with, but what I read and what I hear is that they're more like almost real.
Yeah.
But they're virtual, right?
Yeah.
And then the kids get to play almost like in real life, because they're connected with friends too at the same time, right? And so all of that is like, okay, where's life? And then this is life, or is this life, the virtual life?
Right.
And I think they get confused into that, right? To the point that sometimes they, you know, as they grow, Milo has explained some cases that he has that, you know, they're really off the reality, right?
Yeah, it's perhaps a lot easier for a child to imitate a cartoon with children aggressing towards each other than it is to try to imitate a coyote dropping an anvil off a mountain onto, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
But they may even start understanding that that's okay.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, exactly,
okay.
exactly, right.
There was when I took Leah to the pool, I think it was 2 years ago. There was a little girl that she was friends with, and she had a water gun. What was 2 years ago? Was she 4? And she took the water gun and she's holding it like this at Leah. I was appalled. I was appalled. Like, how would she know how to do that?
You know how we said the kids absorb everything?
Yeah.
So when a child walks, just bring, we can do a test on our time, you know, and just have them walk here, one after the other one. You can see who has watched TV that morning, the entire weekend, who watches TV and who doesn't watch it. You can just see it. You can feel it. They talk about it. It's in their bodies. There's like a whole, you know, different energy, and then that energy goes towards the playtime too. Pushing, you know, with it more than what, you know, a child would do, because they need to learn how to share or take turns, right? More. It's like almost impulsive. So they absorb all that they see on TV. You know, or screen time. Actually, I walked into a restaurant, local restaurant this weekend, and I know I read about this and I hear about this, but I still had a hard time believing this family table, 4 people. The son is maybe 12, the mother and the father. You know, it looks a lovely family. The little girl, she was 2 or 3 maybe, sitting at the table with an iPad, with a movie. And I happen to walk by, and I see this lady is doing something, you know, like a dance that is not even appropriate for a child, but not even talking about the content. The fact that she is going out with her family, and she's hypnotized with this huge things in there, so isolated from the entire restaurant experience, watching this. And is this about not having the means to do something else? No, it's not understanding that that's not okay, really. Yeah. It's not okay.
What a missed opportunity to learn social skills.
And to connect with your family, right?
Right, connect with your family, yeah.
Now there's actually restaurants that they provide little iPads for
no
kids.
way.
You sit down and the waitress will ask you, would you kids like...
No.
Would you like a tablet?
We
charge
the restaurants.
I'm telling you, they have them all charged on the wall. They grab 3 and they hand it to the kid. They have pre-programmed games into them.
So how come
they're germ fest?
I'm telling you.
So we are on another level.
Laura would have the steam cleaner going. Hold on, Leo.
I'm more concerned about the germs than when watching the iPad.
No, so, but
No,
I think
I'm telling you,
you know,
I know.
going back to what you said, we have to analyze ourselves or as a society, you know, where we're going with this.
Yeah.
Because how can we think
You're
that's
lucky,
okay?
You're lucky though.
I mean, it's where are
He
we?
just
I
told us
mean,
about all the birds he saw.
it's incredible.
14,
It's
I
just
thought. Maybe
incredible
11.
to think that is
And 4 the
okay.
next 5 there, so yeah.
Can some of that be temperament too? Like you said, what kids will latch onto or notice, or you know, like when we watch those. I mean, I don't think I watch a tremendous amount of cartoons, but it never occurred to me that I would do any of those things.
Mm.
Like you said, and it never occurs to me now if I
Right.
see some violent commercial or whatever, right? So I just don't.
They're
Yeah.
addicted.
Is it-
They're addicted.
No,
That's the screen.
But is it a
temp-
personality thing also sometimes?
I
I mean,
think
I know you can get
He said that.
desensitized to things, but as far as even the technology,
I
some
think-
kids are addicted and some kids aren't.
Yeah, I think temperament factors in definitely, but also just the level of exposure, the like the saturation right now in the media of these kind of aggressive, violent kind of themes. You know, even for kids who are not temperamentally inclined to be aggressive, I think just the amount of it, could lead kids who are not even temperamentally inclined
I see.
to.
That's
You
kind
know
of
what I mean?
what I was. Yeah.
But also, you said it was important to build that connection, right? And
Yeah.
and feeling of belonging. And if the kids are isolated, if we're raising kids that will isolate themselves through
Yeah.
different kinds
Right.
of screens, and if we think that's okay, then we are creating more bullies.
Yeah.
And we are, as a society, accepting things that we should not accept, really.
Yeah.
Right? We see it in the news. It's
Yeah.
happening more and more. So the question is going back to that. You know, how can you prevent that bullying or that from growing?
Well, can I make the point too that adults are bullies too, especially online?
Yeah.
Or I'm sure they're bullies in person also,
Oh, yeah.
but I think it's rampant online.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how is it ever going to stop if the adults are doing it too? It's not like the adults are
Yes.
walking around knowing, how to behave.
Right.
And
That's
that's
right.
a big part of the problem.
I think it's so. I just want to highlight something along these lines now, because for the sake of kind of taking ownership as adults, taking ownership and responsibility for some of this, I think it's really important to just also consider the larger kind of cultural and societal factors, that are involved, and the way in which bullying is really embedded kind of in the fabric of our American culture, in a way. I think we have to acknowledge that. This is not just a problem of our children. This is a problem that's embedded into our culture, from the time that our country was founded. It was founded by taking land from other people. Native Americans are still bullied today, if you want to call it that, in the way that they're being kind of isolated from their native culture,
Right.
and being stolen from, and just being poorly treated. This is from we're talking this is in the very beginning of the founding of this country. So from the ways that other minority, black people have been treated in this country, over the course of time, the way women have been treated, how women have had to fight for equal rights, and still today, in some ways, are not treated equally. Homophobia, there are all of these kind of just widespread forms of bullying that go by all these other names,
Yeah.
but are really embedded into the fabric of our country. Advertising, I consider certain kinds of advertising to be bullying in a way. Cosmetic commercials that lead us, or pharmaceutical commercials trying to lead us to feel badly about ourselves, shaming us about the way we look or the way we feel, right? In an attempt to kind of push us, coerce us into doing something that's going to make us better people in some way. So it's even in our advertising, our video games. Speaking about technology and media, our video games. Grand Theft Auto is one of the most widely sold, most popular video games of all time, in which the goal is to go around treating people poorly.
So you say that is, I think it happens everywhere, bullying, not just in this country, although I can see your point.
I can only
in the
speak to this
sense
country, but
that-
I'm sure.
In the sense that the individualism here is like highlighted,
Mm.
it's like it's it's recognized as something really good to be independent, to be the best, to be, it's a very competitive culture. I can see it in that sense. So then, if you're not the best, like you said, maybe you become a bully, right? It's just one component of that. But I think it happens it's human nature too in general, although maybe the Eastern cultures, in opposition to the Western culture, are more, they think more as a community.
Yeah.
Because the thinking, as an individual, then I can see how you can build, with the individualism, that need of being superior.
Right.
And actually many cartoons are, and there's text written about this, it's not my idea, about superheroes and all of that, right? That was born here, mainly.
Right.
And that culture of being the Superman or the Superwoman or super in everything you do, right? In that sense, I can see it very, very strong in this country. But there is bullying everywhere, right?
Yeah.
In the world, the women, and, and the...
I guess it's human nature, so bullying is everywhere.
It's been forever around, because even before, how the society always put a group of people aside also. Like if you had lepra, how to say lepra?
Lepers.
Yeah, so they would put you in a, isolated if you had whatever. And now, I think we
witches.
do it. Yes,
Yeah.
witches,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Now we are
You're a
all,
witch,
now we all come to the workshops now. And so, but I think society in general, right, tends to leave a group out, and I can see that now, for example, in the schools with special needs kids, right, they're in a different classroom or whatever need they have, instead of being integrated. And in the society, you don't see, at least in this area that I'm living right now, for example, people with Down syndrome around. And I still find them in Argentina everywhere, or handicapped people, right, or kids with special. They are outside, they are out. And so maybe that's a tendency, right?
It's really interesting you mentioned that, because I've been thinking about this recently, how when I was a kid, I remember seeing more of a variety of people in terms of you would see kids with disabilities. You would go out to the store, you'd see kids with disabilities, and as a little kid seeing that, of course, it would pique some interest and curiosity, and you'd wonder about it, you'd have questions about it,
and you may need to wait a little longer, right, for somebody too, so you learn to be more tolerant too, right?
But so it's not my imagination that today you go out and you don't see.
Yeah.
You don't see it. Yeah.
You don't see it.
Yeah. So let's go back to talking about a question that you brought up earlier about the legal kind of parts of this. How the law treats bullying, right? So in schools have something called harassment, intimidation, and bullying policies, which are basically legal policies against bullying in school. So now, the way that some of these incidents are treated is that if someone has been reported for possibly bullying, an HIB report, a harassment, intimidation, bullying case is kind of opened, and an investigation has begun to determine whether or not this is actually an act of bullying. And without remembering the specifics of it, an act of bullying has to involve, like I said, I think, a differential of power between the bully and the victim, but also something very specific done or said with regard to the victim's either, race or ethnicity or size, something physical. So it has to be relatively specific in order to qualify as bullying. When I was working as a school psychologist in the school, I remember one time that I was assigned to take part in one of these investigations, one of these HIB investigations, and my role was to interview the victim, the apparent victim of this bullying. And so my job was supposed to be really trying to get as much information from this kid as I can, about, when did this happen, where did it happen, how many times did it happen, what did he say, just to get all the specific details. And there was so much time being spent with this kid just trying to gather evidence against the bully. And there was relatively no attention paid to what is this kid's needs. This kid is sitting here right now feeling however he's feeling about what happened, and that's not what I'm talking with him about. What I'm talking with him about is, is this person, does this person deserve to be punished or not? You know, and I just thought there was a huge opportunity missed there, and it was so beside the point. You know, this whole idea that punishment is the way to approach these situations, I felt was just missing the larger point. Might it be more effective?
Right, and
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but, and not only that, but what about the person who's doing the bullying?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's like a lot of like, you know, emotional and
Yeah.
deep-rooted psychological,
Need.
you know, issues and needs that are being expressed through that kind of behavior. So, I mean, just like the victim needs attention and needs some guidance and some caring and an open ear, so does the perpetrator, just as much, if not more so.
Yeah.
Because they're going to continue this behavior,
Yeah.
and you're going to have more victims unless you address that.
Right.
You know, so
And potentially the outcome of these
Yeah.
things is that if a kid is found to, if an HIB investigation is approved, if it is kind of founded, then this kid now has on his permanent school record that he was a perpetrator of harassment, intimidation, and bullying, right? So a 13-year-old
Right.
kid is now kind of
Right.
branded.
and every teacher going forward has this information. Every teacher going forward has a preconceived notion of what they're going to be dealing with.
Right.
And it changes the entire way that people interact with you,
Right.
you know, as far as the school setting goes, because like any other labeling or whatever, it stays with you.
Right.
You know, and
And what about
you
the
know,
big
and
What about the
It's
college
kinda like-
admissions when you're applying? Does it also go into your records at that time, or?
It's a good question. I'm not totally sure about
Okay.
that. Milo, though, you were alluding to something we talked about earlier as far as the bully's emotional experience. You know, we talked about shame earlier. The fact that some of what's going on probably is they're acting out shame. You know, and punishment only adds to that shame. So it just creates, I think, a vicious cycle.
more
Fulfilling
anger,
prophecy.
More anger,
Creates more anger.
Yeah.
more shame, more acting out,
Right.
more shame, more anger, more acting out. You know.
resentment. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, perhaps a more productive use of time would be to sit the kids that are involved down together, sit as a group and kind of talk through
Yep.
what's going on here. Have give the victim a voice, like you were talking about before, rather than treat this child as if they are the helpless victim. And I'm going to help you by punishing this bully, so he'll be out of your life. You know, he won't bother you anymore. Well, what happens the next time the bully rolls around? Has this victim learned anything about how not to be a victim next
Right.
time? So giving that child a voice, having them speak to the bully, having the bully listen, maybe right, having that kind of emotional dialogue perhaps would be more valuable.
So the response from most of the public schools in dealing with the fact that they put this HIB legislation in place, but they're not seeing a reduction in the incidence of bullying.
Mm.
What they've now put on is these character education
Mm.
curriculums. I don't know if you're familiar with any of them, or if you
Some.
can speak to some of them, and like maybe what works, what doesn't work in terms of those like whole school character education, anti-bullying things.
I think I'll give you a large answer, I guess. The first thing that comes to my mind is, how can we expect a single discrete kind of curriculum-based scripted kind of program to help our kids when from the very top the whole system
Yes. The whole
is
system.
bullying everybody.
Yes.
To teachers,
impossible
the
to fix
policy,
it.
the policy, educational policy in this country is the bully of the system. I mean, teachers are bullied into teaching a certain way, into feeling threatened when their students don't achieve certain scores on certain tests. If I'm imagining this based on listening to kids all the time as my job, I think the educational setting itself, kids feel bullied by that educational setting. You know,
I think
kids.
so. I
If
totally
you,
agree.
I mean, if you look at the three checks that all weigh us that we talked about earlier: bullying involving aggression, being ongoing, and involving a differential of power. You can imagine a little 7-year-old kid going into the school environment, being forced to sit at a desk all day long, being forced to sit still, And this going on day after day after day, and the child has no control or power in the situation because the adults are the one in power. There's a humongous power differential there. For certain kids, that kind of setting, that kind of situation is a complete affront to their natural instincts to want to be engaged in hands-on physical activity.
And to feel that they belong,
and to
that
feel that
somebody is connected to them.
And to feel that they
so
belong.
the
And have
power
something
the
to
teachers
contribute.
have, the teachers are bullies many times too. So they are
Yeah.
being bullied by the whole system because
Yeah.
they have pressure, but many times because they are not training to positive discipline.
Right.
Mainly, they will treat the kids in a way that they are abusing the power they have.
Right.
And they are humiliating them sometimes in front of the class, or just embarrassing them, not even just getting to the extreme. Well, Juana, look, Juana, Juana.
Yeah,
Is
Juana.
she a conflictive? No.
Oh my God.
No, she was Brian's student. She would just talk to the neighbor, and there was a teacher that would always call her in front of it, and she was so embarrassed of that because she didn't want to be in the spotlight, but also it was just talking to somebody. Okay, you have to be quiet in the class, but the way the teacher would react again and again, with saying her name and saying, why, and she still remembers, right? 25 years old, and this is in high school. So a teacher can also be a bully many times.
I remember my experience in 4th grade. I didn't do my spelling homework, and the teacher made me stand up in front of the class, and she called me a yo-yo.
No.
Oh.
Oops, that's the win,
That's
no
Yeah.
power.
But I think, like, as a society, because they're definitely, as a society, like, we don't know how to disagree with each other. We don't know how to respect each other. We don't know how to politely disagree with each other. Like, which is politics. I think about it in politics all the time. And I feel like that's just the root. Like, as people,
Yeah.
we can't politely disagree. We can't respect where maybe we don't agree. You know what I mean? And I think just being able to do that, wouldn't that just be the key to so much?
That's why it's one of the reasons I value these kind of discussions so much. These in-person discussions where we can share our ideas. Like, that's why I always try to encourage everyone to just share your thoughts. Like, we don't have to be right about these things, but it's important that we're just sharing our thoughts, and not worrying about being politically correct all the time about what we say. Just trusting each other enough that if we say something that happens to offend someone, that can be repaired. We can talk about it and we can learn from each other, We're so afraid to speak. We're so afraid to say what it is we see,
I think what you were talking earlier about that sense of belonging, and sometimes you can have that belonging by being a part of a team, like a very formal group. But those informal groups, I think, are much harder to belong to in this current school system as they're set up, because the children are expected to be good at everything. There's this expectation
Right.
that it's not just okay for you to be a good artist or a good creative writer or good at math, that you have to be good at everything in order to you have to measure up to that yardstick.
Right.
So,
or even that you have to be good, because you can't just do it. Like, when we do the importance of the arts in education, when we talk to the parents and we tell them, everybody can paint, right?
Right.
But there's always
You
one
don't have
thing,
to be good to do it, but no, I know what you mean. But
there's
it's
always
just
one thing that you're good at that gives you a sense of pride, and it's okay to just have one or two things that you're good at. That is where you draw your sense of pride from, and that it's okay that somehow you'll find your way in the world, with that skill, and then having all those other skills of being able to interact with other people, which also is, I think, we're finding is more and more difficult in when things like recess aren't valued. So I think if you put those two things together, when you don't have the opportunities to interact socially and work things out in a positive way, and then you also have this devaluing I think the way people are, the human nature, the fact that everybody has a particular gift or skill or whatever it is, and that we should value that and support that, as opposed to being again, actually externally shaming somebody
Yeah.
for not being good at everything.
School can be a very shaming experience for kids, and you know we've talked a lot about how that shame can manifest. And then when you pair that with the fact that the school, the typical educational environment, does not value cooperation, but actually teaches competition. So on top of being shamed, now you're being taught you have to outdo all your peers so you can get into college or for whatever other reason. It's all about competition, constantly evaluating ourselves, constantly comparing ourselves to other people. What do we think is going to happen to a bunch of kids who are being shamed for not being good enough and being told you have to be better at everything than everyone? It's not a surprise what we're seeing, you know.
So all these programs that you mentioned, I think there's just patches that really don't work. You know, it's like some schools will say, okay, we teach, you know, empathy this week, and okay, you just have to live with empathy every day, not just teach about empathy this week intellectually. You have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to do it and be the example for the kids, because this, you know, the theory is very nice, but then it's not going to change anything. You just have to change what you do, how you do stuff, and as long as the schools, you know, are based on competition or not on punishments and rewards, right? That is, I don't think there is a solution for the bullying. And if we don't find a solution in the schools, which is where most of the people, not everybody goes to school, but most of the people go, I don't know how we can stop it in the society, really.
Yeah.
I really don't know what's a way to stop it, unless there is a really revolution and change in thinking how we do stuff. Yeah. Sure. I mean, we are doing something here, right?
We are here, yeah.
I'm glad I could stop by. Nice to see you again.
Me too.
Okay.
We're at
at least
11
we're
o'clock,
doing
I guess,
something
right?
here.
Okay. So we didn't get that much into technology, I know, although it came up, you know, a little bit while we were talking. So, yeah, if there's more that you guys want, I mean, I have a little bit of time. If you guys want to talk more about technology,
Yes.
specific things about it, we can do that for a little while.
Yeah,
Lara,
the title is Bullying in the Age of
Bullying in the Age of
Technology, so
Technology, yeah.
we can talk more about it. Yeah. How it's affecting you, probably see it in teenagers mostly.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot
And
about
what can you do as
the
a
teenagers
parent
I know.
to curb it, or, I mean, I'm sure you can't really stop it, because kids today are going to get exposed to
Yeah.
technology and all the bullying that goes with it. What can you do as a parent to kind of, you know, make sure they're not affected by it? Because there's always the pressure to fit in.
Right.
And, you know.
Well, also Facebook and Instagram and these other technology and Twitter technology platforms give you that sense of belonging by, you know, how many likes did I get on
Right.
my post and
Right.
how many friends do I have, and none of that's real. So
No, the pictures that these teenagers are posting are also not real, because it's too much of filtering that goes on,
Yeah.
because the girls or even the boys want to look perfect. So if
But
you
just-
have like one blemish, you are going to first like pretty much erase it and then post your picture online just to get the maximum likes, right?
or do something totally ridiculous, something totally outrageous.
Right.
Yeah, even like body types, because I remember I was bullied in my high school because I was like in by Indian standards I was among the taller girls in my class, and then obviously heavier, and we used to have this yearly wellness checkups in class, and I think that was like the most silliest thing that the kid that the school could do, step on the weighing scale, and then they used to like so some
In school?
in classrooms. So like we had 60 kids in our class, and
We
all
did
the
that
60
too.
kids,
I did that in our
yeah,
school.
like we had to step on the weighing scale,
I
and
mean,
then
For what purpose?
they were used to be like hounding, oh my god, you're 65!
Oh, we had a little space.
No, it was embarrassing
that's
to the
so
core.
weird.
I used to
I never
dread
seen
that
scale
day.
in the classroom?
Well, in gym class. So
In
you
the
go
gym
and
class.
they would
Check
check
everybody for scoliosis.
They did the scoliosis check.
So yeah, and I remember dreading that each year, the day of wellness checkup, and I was like, oh my god,
Yep.
because obviously my weight is going to show up. I have double bones.
No, but everybody weighs different.
And I wasn't
It's just
skinny like
different.
the other girls.
can't believe it.
So, but now it's at a different level.
Well, it is
With
really.
body shaming and everything because
Yeah.
you're being trolled. You're being given a number. Apparently, that's what I heard. The teenage girls, they are being given numbers based on their bodies and looks.
Well,
1
that-
to 10.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I've heard.
That used to happen on paper. We used to do that, for better or worse. That stuff happens, before we had all this social media. But it used to happen on a scrap of paper.
Oh my
It was
God.
passed around, and eventually the scrap of paper was thrown away.
Oh wow, look at that.
Today,
To what? To score the girls?
exactly. Girls used to do it to boys. Boys used to do it to girls. So this kind of thing would happen. It wasn't that tendency to evaluate wasn't there then, because it was still a competitive environment and an evaluative kind of environment back then. But whereas it used to be on a piece of paper that could be disposed of, now the
whole
rating.
school knows it.
No, it's on. Everybody has it on their phone. There's no getting rid of it. So. And it's such a way, like, kids really see the social media as being a way to get attention. They're so hungry for attention. I can't help but wonder, what are we not doing earlier on in kids' lives to fill them up with the sense that they're important? And they have, like you said, Laura, before, that they have something meaningful to contribute. I don't think kids are really growing up with the sense that they have anything really meaningful to contribute. So a way that they can kind of gain that sense of belonging and need is by getting noticed online, getting the attention online.
I hear more and more how they want to find a purpose in life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is, of course, it's essential, right?
Yep.
But how they're using that more and more, that even my essentials told me in the marketing class, they told him that instead of mission, for the school, for example, you can say common purpose. And I'm saying this because to me it still gets my attention in how you have to put that into words. Like, if your life doesn't have purpose, and then you have to look for the purpose.
Yeah.
And I heard actually somebody in a class that I'm doing saying, I finally found my purpose, and she is probably 30 years old. So maybe in the lack of having, or I don't know.
I agree. That's a big
Right?
issue. The purpose, this lack of purpose and meaning.
They've tried to find online or in these groups that they're being liked or something, or approved, or I don't know.
I think it's also lacking in in education. It's like we're always talking about readiness for career in college, but not like, well, what's my purpose going to be in society? What am I gonna, how is what I'm doing on a daily basis meaningful?
Right.
How do I gain meaning out of what I'm doing?
Right. Right now.
Yes.
Not just in the future. What am I going to have to contribute? Well, what do I have to contribute right now, so that by the time I'm in the future, I already know what it feels like to be an active contributor.
Yes, it's like they never had found that.
Yeah.
And then now it's all of a sudden they're 30 and they have to find it.
Right. One study found that actually 9% of kids bullied themselves online just to garner the attention. Like, they would post something negative about themselves.
Like the actor that just.
Oh, did someone just do that? An actor?
Right.
Oh, was it Jesse Smollett?
He was accused of it anyway.
No,
right?
that he filed a false. He's accused now of filing a false police report.
False
But
police
he just
report.
had himself beat up.
Didn't get the
Or he-
attention.
Really?
Right.
Or
He did.
he had himself beat up, or if he claimed he was beat up.
And it was all made up.
Yeah. That's a desperate attempt for attention.
Mhm.
Like, maybe I can get some sympathy from people. I think some kids feel, Yeah.
They claimed that he was trying to get a higher. He's trying to get attention, so he'd get more money from his acting gig.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the sense of belonging. I think is also tied to a basic sense of worthiness, being worthy. Like, am I worthy of people noticing me?
Yeah.
Am I worthy of attention? What will happen if I post something and claim to, and say something bad about myself? Will people come to my aid? Will people actually care?
What do caregivers do under such circumstances? Like, do you have any suggestions, ideas? Especially teenagers, they don't want to listen to a parent,
Right.
no matter how much you instill a sense of confidence or positive image.
Well, I think this, is trying to get the attention in a negative way, which we talk during the positive discipline workshops. And so, this actor is somebody that is, 25, 30, maybe 35. I don't know how old he is, right? But he's still trying to get attention in a negative way. So my feeling is that, when, or at least from the workshops of positive discipline, is that giving the attention in a positive, when they're being positive, so reinforcing, positive reinforcement, right? When they're being positive, then giving the attention at that moment, I think is important, because that will say, okay, it's okay, this is okay, right? Because I think we do all need attention.
Yeah.
Don't we? Right? We do need attention.
And also another positive discipline kind of tenet, give kids responsibilities. Give them things to do so that they can contribute. There's so many kids growing up today. I see so many teenagers that I work with who are just not expected to do anything for themselves. They're like, and so they might not realize it consciously, but there's part of them that is feeling very incompetent because they don't have to do anything for themselves, whether it's their own laundry or whether it's helping make dinner or anything really. I don't think kids have jobs as often as they used to when I was growing up. Like, I don't see kids out there mowing lawns for people like I used to do. I'm not saying everybody should do what I did as a kid, but I think kids used to be more active in terms of finding ways that they could contribute, make their own money, feel important. I don't think there's as many, we don't provide as many opportunities for our kids to feel important today, and so I think holding them responsible, giving them jobs, expecting them to contribute, I think is one way to build that sense of being competency. And also, sometimes parents feel kind of helpless to create structure for some reason, or especially around this issue of technology and social media. But parents do need to, in some ways, even teenagers, help to keep their kids safe by providing structure and limits and boundaries. Maybe having kids only use the computer in a public area of the house instead of in your bedroom, for hours on end. Just because teenagers fight back and will push against these kind of boundaries doesn't mean we shouldn't be setting them, if we feel it's in their best interest.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Having it set up in a family room or whatever.
Because really, kids don't realize it, but when they have full access to their devices and social media in the privacy of their own room, they're actually depriving themselves of privacy that they need during that period of development, right? Because there's really, there's no boundaries for them. So while they think, oh, I'm in my room, so I'm giving myself privacy, it's really not private if they're using all of that time to be interacting constantly and posting about themselves and sharing about themselves and all of that. There's a complete lack of privacy, actually.
I think, from the experience I see with my kids, that they grew up in an area where everybody had, whatever, video games or stuff that I didn't even know about. But so just not having that or providing that or just giving them other opportunities, like, I don't know, a box to build or something, their own time to connect with themselves. Because I need that, so it's not that I did it on purpose, but for myself for the introvert aspect, just even to get to read something, right? So they always had activities going on, like building or even reading or doing whatever that fulfilled them too. And I think in the moments, as they grow, that the technology is available and all of that, they will crave for that, because they found a connection with themselves and pleasure on that, to the point that I see my son works with media now, right, and he's studying and all that, but he doesn't find his phone most of the time, right? We try to even get a hold with him and it's like in bottle, but so it's somewhere, he left it somewhere, right? But he needs, when he gets home, a break from college, that he sees all these people and he's involved in all these classes, he needs that time for himself. So like you just said, having a computer, having something is not really giving yourself the privacy that you need.
Right.
I think if they grow up having that, those opportunities, then they will need that later on. And therefore, I don't know if they're going to be looking to be connected virtually all the time.
Right.
My son even says, to talk to my son, I have to be with him, because the phone is almost like for an emergency. It's like he will call and say that he needs something, right? Or not. Actually, he called this weekend to tell me that it was a great week. They went away to Maine, and so he told me about the great experience too. I shouldn't be saying just that, but I'm saying the connection with the real world, right? With the family, with whatever little moments you have. I think if they grow up like that, I think that's important, and you will do it with your kids, right? So that will carry on, I think, when they're teenagers, and then you think that the screen time is out of control, right? That you cannot really control it anymore. I think those moments will stay with them, and they will not look for that all the time.
I hope so.
But some kids actually, even in my neighborhood, that grow with the video games, or not, I'm just saying video games because I'm very ignorant. I mean, I know there are all kinds of things, but just connected to the screen. And even in the basement, we don't have a full basement, for example, but most of the kids do have it. At one point, for my kids, it was like, how we don't have it, you're here, you just do it here because we're here. We're all together, I'm cooking and you're doing whatever you have to do. But I think it's a way to being connected to, because those kids sometimes had to call the parents on the phone in the house. Right? Or they were looking for them to eat something and they couldn't find them, right? We live in an area where houses are out of proportion, right? And so they were not connected. They were not connected. So those same kids will come to our house, I think, to find a connection sometimes, because everything happened right there. Homework going on with it is going on with everything all at the same time, and that's how I grew up. And I think that connection is so important. That if you build those moments with your child, then you don't need to worry so much.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry.
I think it's important to what you're saying about privacy, and what I was saying about privacy is to instill in them to understand that like nothing you do in a digital platform is private.
Yeah.
And not email, not texting, and it's too easily shared, and it's too easy for other people to get into it. It's out there. It's out there for, like you said, for long periods of time, and it's too easy for people to do, who are dealing with their own issues, to do something with it that isn't what you intended, or to misconstrue it, or to make something out of it that it wasn't.
That's right. You meant losing privacy in that sense, that you are posting everything.
Yeah. Well, I meant it. I meant it in that sense, and I also just meant it in terms of what you were saying, Laura, in terms of the value of introspective time.
Yeah,
just
so
time
needed,
to be with yourself. That kind of privacy.
Yes.
Journaling
important.
in a journal, as opposed to typing to other people.
Yes.
Yeah. That kind of self-dialogue that I think kids used to have more often has now become a dialogue with others.
Yeah.
But it's so important to have that self-dialogue, I think.
Yeah.
And that at that age too, that when your filter isn't fully developed.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
everything that you say just
Yep.
and then it's out there, and then you can't take it back. And versus like if I just said something to someone, they don't have a record exactly of what I said, and the memory of that will fade.
Right.
As opposed to I'm just going to type whatever I feel and
be exposed then.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That in terms of like I guess in terms of when the kids I guess I guess the bubble needs to include like those are the tools that we need to give our kids is like how do you protect yourself from harm? You need to protect yourself from harm by not saying everything that's on your mind. And I think if we tell them that in a group context when you're speaking with somebody, we teach them that. But are we teaching them that applies to everything online too?
Yeah. It undermines impulse control in a way too, because you don't have to. You just immediately, when you have a thought, you can just put it right out there. As opposed to if you didn't have that platform, maybe you'd have to write it down and then just sit with it for a while. Or maybe it would go nowhere, and then you'd realize, oh yeah, I'm certainly glad I didn't share that. 10 minutes later, you might have that thought, but 10 minutes is a long time now when you can just, shoot things out immediately. And when you look at even the president, there's no impulse control. He tweets whatever he's thinking at any moment. So, like, the adults are also modeling this. Did I just say that on?
Yes. Should I stop?
I mean, it's, you know.
Well, he's coming after you.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a tweet in 2 seconds.
Absolutely.
We'll tweet at him.
I don't tweet, so at least have that going.
That was
for
an
me.
attempt to get negative attention, right?
Yeah, it was.
Now you're gonna be in the news.
We'll raise the profile of the guy school.
Exactly. Yeah,
No, but it's true. It's
When you
public,
think
That's a
you
good
know.
example, though. I
Yeah,
have to give
it
you
is
that. That's
very
what, I mean,
public.
if we talk about somebody at the top, like if they're doing it, yeah, really. So.
Yeah, it's most of us. It's not just the kids. It's actually
Yeah.
most of us today. It's a lot. You know, most of us adults are kind of doing the same kind of thing. So how could we expect our kids to do differently?
I mean, who has the time to make all the comments? Right? I mean, I don't know.
Well,
was
people are
looking
doing it
into
while driving, while
information.
going to the bathroom. They're like on their phone all the time.
But
so
to comment, and I was
Yeah, but
looking
that's
into
what-
information about actually how, you know, because it's a big mystery for me how they teach geography in this country, so I'm still trying to learn and find out because to me it's missing. But so I'm trying to see, okay, the different models of the continents, and so then I get into, okay, but let's see from this in Europe, whether Europe is more similar to what we do in Argentina, where we teach, you know, with 6 continents, and the continent is, you know, you have to have certain, there's a definition for a continent and this and that. And I'm like, and I get to a website and they're talking about this, and I see all these comments that you mean, you know, people answering to each other, and sometimes they were very nasty, and I'm like, who has the time to even talk about the continents in a nasty way? I mean, it's like, it was like unbelievable. So I see what you mean when you're exposing, and then people has, who has the time to go there and just even be arguing about some, I don't know.
well, it's a free country and everybody has access these days.
Right, but it's
You can
dangerous.
just say
It's
whatever you
dangerous,
want
yeah.
and
Yeah, so going back to
anonymous trolls.
Yeah.
the power of technology too, because if you get that, you know, into a situation with teenagers, I think are the most, and maybe you don't agree with this, that they are like the most vulnerable
Yeah.
with all of this,
I think so.
right?
Yeah.
And it's really a shame. Talking about shame, it's really a shame
Yeah.
that we as adults cannot protect them, you know, from this by even just, I don't know how, like just not allowing to certain things to be created. Right?
Yeah.
Well, there's so much, there's a certain level of anonymity that you get, even though you're like, even if you're on Facebook and you are your own person on Facebook, still not saying those things and not saying them to your face and having to see you,
Right.
the look in your face when I'm saying it is so much easier than doing it in person. So I actually had an experience where
Oh yes, typing something, you know, to
yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody I knew from my town said something about me online. She didn't exactly mean me, but it was very obvious that she was talking about me. And then I ran into her like a week later in the drugstore, and like she didn't want to look at me.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I
Right.
made sure to say hello to her, but you know, it's just kind of, it was very interesting. I think that she was maybe feeling bad about what she did and maybe rethinking it, but you know, now she did. It's was
well,
a week
it doesn't
later.
have a tone also, you know, the written text or email, I learned it, you know, it's just, it's so difficult to convey what you are trying to say,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it doesn't have the tone, or the tone can be interpreted in a different way too. And my kids were talking, and I say my kids, and I don't know how I should, my teens were talking about the 3 dots, you know, after a sentence that I love to use actually, but just to let it, you know, somebody think about that.
Yeah.
So in a different way, and you know how they interpret, they are still teenagers, right? 19, 25. That is
say.
passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I'm like,
Yes.
That's not what I thought.
what?
I look like the jolliest
Yes,
person on
and
earth.
then
I
they
use
say, oh no,
exclamation
it's always the
points.
case. It's
I
always the
use
case.
exclamation
Because I'm
points.
afraid. I don't want anybody to
So they even
misinterpret
have,
it, right?
they even have a different, like the whole decoding of the language is different, isn't it? Right? For me, it's like,
Oh,
great,
that's,
you know,
yeah,
3
no,
dots.
that's interesting.
Then you think about it, because I don't know, you know.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Well,
For
even
them
like
is,
email, which is like such, now it's so low tech, but email, it's so hard to write. it's so hard to write a good email. Like,
to find a way that is not going to hurt somebody's
particularly
feelings,
when
right?
you're trying to
Yeah.
resolve a conflict, and there's so many times now when you have to communicate through email, or it's better for
Yeah.
some reason to communicate through email that you want to have it on paper, but it's so hard to get to write it without and be factual, without being emotional, without being interpreted as you attacking another person. And there's times when, like, I think I've written the most bland email ever, and then somebody else is like, "What do you mean?" You know, and
It's
then
not clear anymore.
And you go back and you look at it, and sometimes it's just the frame of mind that they were in, and their attitude about you, possibly, and then there's other times where you just didn't, like the ... you just didn't think that someone would interpret it that way.
Well, no, my kids were explaining to me, like, that is passive aggressive. Like, they understood. So I guess teens, if they use those 3 dots, that's the way. So they had a whole, like, under language. I don't know how to say it. They interpret things in a different way too. So there is a whole language implicit in that
Right.
language, in the language that we
Yeah.
right? You're closer to them.
Yeah, even the use
You're a
of,
teen too.
even
almost.
the use of periods sometimes, like, that could be offensive. Even the use of just, like, a period.
A period?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
offensive?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
How come?
Yes.
A period where?
It
where?
depends.
After this it's offensive.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's like, I mean, I think everybody knows now all caps is like shouting, and you know,
Yeah.
and if the shorter and more, sometimes the shorter, more direct your sentences, with, you know, the use of a lot of periods, can be considered as, like, more aggressive when you're communicating.
Oh, is that
online,
what you
yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like adding periods?
Like, if you just, I don't know, if you're writing no, like, with a period,
No,
that could be a
period.
very aggressive no, you know?
Well, it actually took me like 6 days to answer, you know, just to answer an email, and I'm thinking, okay, how do I say it? Okay, I'll say it this way, and then I write it again. Okay, I'm just gonna say what I think, because it's not gonna change. I'm just gonna say it. I don't know how it's gonna sound, but I'm just gonna say it because I feel the commitment to say it, right? So I said, it took me like 6 days. It's very hard in a text, you know, to convey what you want to. It's.
I know, and it's a time waster. How much time are
True.
you wasting trying
That's
to figure
right.
out how to
That's
say
right.
something too? That's the other
That's
thing.
right.
Right?
Yeah. How to
Like,
say it, what
sometimes
you
just
want to
say it.
say, but not hurting somebody
Yeah.
else's feelings, or not, not provoking a reaction that, you know.
And even after
Doesn't
sending it,
keep
you're
the
fighting
dialogue.
about it. So then again, you're like still
it's like
wasting your
wasted
time.
time.
Exactly. Even after sending it, you're still thinking about it, that how the other person is going to perceive it, and
Or
then
if they
fretting
don't
about
reply,
it and
you're
spoiling
like,
your.
okay, I didn't, you know. Okay, the dialogue is
Because
finished
the
here.
send button is not the end of it.
I know. But also the lack of time, because sometimes, you know, there's no an instant reply, so then, because there's no time to, because that was part of my response, you know, taking so much time. Or sometimes they go all the way to the bottom and then I totally forget, which that happens too. But
Oh,
who knows
never
what the
respond
person
to anything.
interprets, right? That I didn't want to reply, and it's just there is no enough time even to,
People do expect like an immediate response.
right?
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the screen time, you know, in children is something that we can talk also. We can go back to that when we do the positive discipline workshops, because it's so important to understand that it's not just what we choose that the kids will watch, it's the time they spend in front of the screen.
Yeah.
That is precious time that they're
Right.
missing. And so, do we have, can we just say, we have, yeah, do we have the postcard somewhere? So we do have, I want to thank you, Jason, for,
Oh.
I don't know if you want to, if you have any other comment or,
No, just thanks as always for having me. I enjoyed these conversations. Yeah.
thank you very much for coming to do this very important workshop. And Jason will be with us again for 2 Mondays on education, right? On positive discipline. And we'll give you the dates because I'm not sure which ones are Mondays here. I think it's March 28th. And
Check my phone.
we'll post the dates.
My goal
for
is to
the-
be there for all four, all 4 of those. If we're,
If we're doing the evening ones.
Yeah.
We'll see
So.
what the interest is in
Yeah.
the evenings.
Okay.
And if not, we'll just do them in the morning.
Okay.
On Mondays on education. But thank you very much.
Thank you.